more places to put house numbers than just on your house? Hi, I'm Della Hansmann of Mid-Mod Midwest, and this is Brandy McLean, founder of Modern House Numbers. And today we're talking about how to incorporate your house numbers into landscaping design and more. So yeah, let's get into it.
Great. Thank you for having me, Della. It's so good to see you.
Likewise. So what would you say what do you think of the obvious places to put a house number? And then maybe what are some less than obvious places you could put house numbers? Also,
Sure.
should you have
Well,
house numbers in more than one place?
that's true. Yeah. I think the most obvious, obviously, is probably next to your front door or on your garage or your mailbox. But if we're thinking about landscape design, I think there's a great opportunity to incorporate it within your existing design or to create a new element to like highlight the house number. So things to consider if you're a mid-century modern enthusiast like yourself, Della, is maybe you have a breeze wall, and that's a great place to accent some house numbers.
Yeah.
Or, maybe there's a planter in your yard or a large boulder, or there's a column near your entryway, or even a landscape fence, or, there's always opportunity of a curb, but you might not have a mailbox along the street. But if you do have a curb, you can do a curb stencil and have house numbers along the street. And the most important thing, though, I think to consider when placement is thinking about lighting.
Mhm.
Don't only want to think of where your house number is located during the day, which we often do when we're selecting, but considering where your existing lighting is, or if you would add new, maybe solar landscape lights to uplight your numbers to make sure they're visible at night. And then also one thing that we hear from customers is, if you're redoing your whole landscaping in the front, you want to think about obstacles that could possibly grow and block your house
Oh,
numbers. Like you don't want to plant a small bush that then might grow 5 feet and block the house numbers.
not
And
unless you want to do that sort of traditional mid-century thing where you're out there with the trimmer every year with a
yes,
flat top, which is a choice if you want to have a super time capsule house, but not exactly low maintenance.
yes, exactly, exactly. And visibility is always key. It's great to pick numbers that accent your style, but if they're not visible for the street or emergency responders, then we kind of miss the boat. And then also, I think there's an opportunity to maybe match the existing architecture style when you're picking a color of the finish, for example, or some landscape elements. We live in the Southwest, for example. We live in Tucson, Arizona, and in our house number, we have a lot of rusted steel. And so we've selected bronze powder coated numbers because it
Yeah.
kind of matches our, earth tones of our landscape as well as the features of our home. So I think those are some other, things to consider when you're selecting your house number location.
Yeah. So if people already have a yard, if they're not planning to make big changes to the yard, they might look for any fence or vertical element. Would you ever attach house numbers to an alive thing like a tree, or is that not a good idea?
We have had people do that. I don't, I can't speak of that. I haven't seen it in person to see
No
how it,
guarantees.
but we have had particularly, back east where some people have some really large monumental trees or
Mhm.
cabins. We've seen it too, where
Mhm.
someone might install like vertical house numbers down a large trunk. And then I think the other natural landscape thing that we see often that people use are boulders, whether they bring in the large boulder or
Or
they
they
use
have one.
a boulder that's on their property already.
Yeah. And then if people were thinking about updating the landscaping at the same time, it might be a place to put in a boulder or build a little fence element or create some sort of a backing visual that is for the house numbers specifically. When you think about in a landscape, is there, do you have recommendations of like how close back to the house versus how far out to the street you would think about being a good idea, a great idea, or maybe a no-go zone?
Yes, that's a great question because we were talking about the importance of visibility. It really depends on the distance from the street, whether someone's walking or a vehicle is coming up to your home, and the location of how far it's set back. So
Yeah.
if you're right along the street front, 4 inch is great. I would say our most typical residential size is 6 inch.
Mhm.
But some customers, are fairly set back and then decide if they're maybe like a football length back from the street to use more like 8 or 12 inch. There's also the opportunity to install something on the street and then also have something on your home, because if you're driving down a lane and turning the corner, by the time you get to the home there might be a couple houses there and you're not sure which is the right location.
Right. I guess there's also the question of attaching house numbers to a mailbox or to the stand for a mailbox if you are in an area that has street adjacent mailboxes. And I think you have a
Absolutely.
stencil for that, right? Or stickers? Is that
Yeah, so we offer a vinyl decal, so you could
right?
stick them on a mailbox or any smooth surface really. And then a curb stencils where it comes with like a negative space and you can spray paint the numbers and then remove the stencil.
That always looks like so much fun. I feel like I don't see that in the Midwest, but in the sort of California streetscape, that seems like a real go-to move, and
I,
it's
I think
lovely.
it's a very Southwest thing that in, Colorado, Arizona, Utah, California, we have a lot of curb stencils.
As I think about it, there are many seasons of the year where the curb in Wisconsin is completely invisible, so that's just not as useful a visual marker. Again, you were thinking like day to night, you got to also think seasonally. So in the
Absolutely.
West, you probably don't want to mount your house numbers anywhere that's low enough they could be subsumed by snow. Actually, my own house numbers, modern house numbers, are on a little fence that I built basically to hold house numbers and also just sort of define the front sidewalk. And I actually, they're maybe a little over 2 feet up off the ground. And there are times in the winter where if I'm throwing snow off the sidewalk and the driveway too aggressively, it'll pile up and start to block the house numbers. So then I have to just remember to throw to the other side. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a really
So I
good thing
shouldn't, no
about.
lower would be a good rule of thumb in the Midwest, not lower than 2 feet, depending on
Absolutely.
your snow load.
Something we don't have to consider in Tucson, Arizona, but that's
Which
a really good comment.
is probably why the curb stencils work there and not
Exactly.
so much here. But you could always have both if you really wanted a curb stencil.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and then I think from as an architect, as a person who likes to build objects, I always am looking for an opportunity to put house numbers on a little fence, or if they were going to go on a mailbox, to make a little micro fence extension for the mailbox post and kind of give it a bit more solidity, and then put house numbers on that. So the examples are many, and your Instagram account is always a great place to go to see other people's good ideas for how that has worked out.
Absolutely.
Marvelous. Well, any last thoughts on how to place numbers in a landscape?
No, I think those are all great ideas and suggestions to consider.
Excellent. Well, this has been a pleasure. Let's do it again.
Can't wait.